So we're going to kick it off basically by going with over the 5-point narrative arch, which we all learned in school, of course. The introduction, the rising climax, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and of course the resolution. Going with that structure, the first question I'm going to throw out there is, how closely do video game writers have to stick to or stray from this structure? Any of you want to take that?
I think it depends on the game. You could have a game that's way more cinematic, like Uncharted is basically a movie and follows the structure very, very closely. But you can have games that are complete, like Tetris doesn't follow that. I mean, arguably Tetris doesn't have much of a narrative, but we've had this discussion. It is clearly about Soviet Russia and yes, the Cold War.
That every discipline in games is very different. I mean, programmers, designers, artists, sound, but we're all telling stories in our own way. Even programmers tell the story in how they construct the way something works. Even just like the physics mm-hmm. in something will tell a story. Mm-hmm. So you have to be able to trust that these people are professionals, they're good at what they do, and they are telling their own story. And your story is not the most important one. Right. It's like, as a writer, it does not trump everything because you have to work as a team.
The writing parts are important, definitely. But there are very few people who work in games who don't know what a function is, how to write a one line of code. You got to be familiar with tool sets. You have to be familiar with the industry. It's like you can read and write all you want, but if you've never seen a movie, chances are you're not going to be a great screenwriter, right? Same thing with games. And
I think that's true. I think you need to know the language of the people you're dealing with on developer side too.
Even if you can't code, at least understand the language.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you want to make games, it's not just about writing, but write and create your own games. There are so many tools that are so easily accessible. Using Twine to write stories that are basically choose your own adventure. It's so easy. There's so many tools. RPG Maker. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no reason why you shouldn't be doing it. If you want to make games, you can make them now for free.
You could have a game that's way more cinematic, like Uncharted is basically a movie and follows the structure very, very closely. But you can have games that are complete, like Tetris doesn't follow that. I mean, arguably Tetris doesn't have much of a narrative, but we've had this discussion.
Some of the games you will gate the narrative so that you can have certain experiences at certain times, but if there's open sections between those gates, you can't control the pacing of it. So while you might expect it to go at this rate, a player might go really fast through this and then take forever through in one other section. So you can't use the same reliability for the pacing, even if you might use the same structure.
The players decide how they experience the story in a multitude of ways, and one of them is the pacing. One of the problems inherent in that is how many times you experience a certain part of the story. For instance, Final Fantasy X, I couldn't beat one of the final bosses to save my life, and there's this really emotional scene, right before that boss.
Get good.
Play me in Blitzball in real life, bro. And I watched that emotional scene, I swear to God, like 50 times, right? And it ceases being emotional after 3 or 4 times, and it kind of ruined that experience, right?
Narrative designer is a term that is used a lot in the industry these days, but it can mean different things from company to company, and even within a company, a narrative designer is not necessarily a specific thing for one person and the same thing for another person. Mm-hmm. 2 narrative designers will have completely different jobs. But in general, a game writer will write story, dialogue, really focus on a more traditional structure of storytelling. A narrative designer will use all of the tools available to games to tell the story. That will include game mechanics, how does the game progress, how does it move, integration of the items into the world in order to make sure that everything is present that is supposed to be, and making sure NPCs are placed where they need to be, that they're performing the right actions. It's because games are not just a reading or listening. they're interactive. So you have to make sure that for a narrative designer that the interaction is there. Like I will have in a game, let's say 6 factions. I will have 6 female voices, 6 male voices. So you've got 6 times 6 times 6 already. And then each of them will have, let's say, 100 different events that I have to write for. Each of those events needs 10 variations. So you quickly get into the multiples of thousands for each character that you need to write these lines for.
Yeah, and the so someone might say like, oh, but that's just volume, right? It's no different. It's the same thing. It's just more. But the difference being that the reason why we're writing these variations, the reason why we're doing this is because narrative in games is very much, like we were saying, like the player story, right? It's what emerges. So I work with Sid Meier, and one of his like design philosophy or design things is like the story that the player tells in their head is always going to be stronger and more important and more moving than the story that we try to tell.
You have many different stories going on in that game because people play the character of Nathan Drake in different ways, right? Perhaps I play Nathan Drake as this calculating guy. I'm going to go and I'm going to sit on top of a vista. I'm going to say, like, okay, I'm going to jump there, and then I'm going to swing from that hook, and where do I go from there? Okay, I got to start over here. Maybe go to a different vantage point, right? Somebody else just YOLOs down the hill, right, and says, I'll figure it out or I'll die, one of the two, right? And those are 2 very different Nathan Drakes, and those tell 2 very different stories. And that's what Alex and Rayna are talking about with, the player story, like the emergent story that comes from playing the same character. Mm-hmm. We always work from the chain link fence approach, which is, you can't have any kind of structure that starts at one point, branches, then branches, then branches, then branches. Right? Like, I don't know how many times I just did that with my fingers, but that's a lot of endings, right? Yeah. And I just blew the scope of my entire project, and now everybody hates me. The chain link fence approach, right? You have a starting point, the branch, maybe another branch, they come back together, right? And this is a complaint a lot of people have with games. A valid complaint. Yeah, and it is, right? It is a valid complaint that, well, yeah, sure, I went down this path, but then I just ended up at the same spot as my buddy anyway, right? So it kind of sucks for me because I didn't really have a true nonlinear experience.
You don't necessarily have to branch through story, but you can branch through gameplay. Mm-hmm. So Deus Ex has 4 different pillars. You've got combat, stealth, hacking, and social. So you can get through a lot of the sections of the game by playing differently. So you get that nonlinear experience and replayability that way, even if certain things branch out and then come back together.
Dishonored did that really, really well, right? Yeah, a lot of nodding heads. Love Dishonored. And the reason I love Dishonored is because it has the aspect I was talking about earlier, right? Like, nobody's gameplay experiences are the same, right? Like, do you want to slaughter your way into this place? Do you want to sneak in, right? Like, are you going to kill this person? Are you going to leave them alive? And the gameplay responds to that really well. And oftentimes games won't respond to it really well. It's like, do you want to sneak or kill? Okay, you chose sneak, but you need to kill these people, right? And Dishonored really allows you to open up and explore those options.